Hi everyone, it's Nicole Spohr here today with a one background, two birthday cards video. This video is focusing on how I took the components that I was creating for one card, which is the card on the right, the white background with the striped text, and I actually made it in a way that I could use both pieces and actually create two cards at the same time. Everything else is pretty much the same. However, the backgrounds are obviously a little bit different. I wanted to create a rainbow text on this white on white background. So we're going to start with the white on white background for our card. All of the stamps and dies I'm using today are from My Favorite Things. This is the number jumble background stamp. Awesome, awesome background stamp. We are actually going to be stamping this on a 4 by 5¼ inch background using clear embossing ink, and then we're going to heat emboss with a white satin embossing powder from Hero Arts. This actually, it's called white, but you're going to see when it's heat set, it kind of has almost a sheen to it. I'd like to say it has a silverish tone to it. It is white, but it's going to just show up better than white or clear. That's why I chose to use this embossing powder instead of a white, because I do want it to show up, but I don't want it to overpower the striped text. So we're doing our stamping and embossing first. Once I have my stamp image, and I did use a Misty to stamp this so that I can make sure and get it right in the exact spot, I'm going to sprinkle on my embossing powder and then heat set this. And when doing a background like this, or really any embossing, I recommend making sure your heat tool is really good and warm before taking it to your paper to avoid additional curling. So I kind of hold my heat tool off to the side a little bit while it's warming up, probably a good 30 to 45 seconds before bringing it to the paper. And then I will often take it to both sides of the paper just to make sure that it's really good and warm. Like I'm heating the back right now, and then I'll flip it over and we're going to melt the embossing powder on the front. As it's melting, you can see it has a little bit of a sheen to it that isn't that pure white. So it's going to show up nicely, and you're going to have that awesome text or number, I guess not text necessarily, but those numbers in the background. Once we have this done, we're going to take the You Take the Cake die, which is all one set. It's going to die cut all of these words at one time, and we're going to die cut that from the number jumble background. I'm going to use a little low tack tape to hold that in place while I run this through my die cutting machine. We want to go ahead and keep all of these letters, all of the inside pieces from the O and the A's. We're going to want to make sure and hold on to all of that because we want to use it for our second card. So I'm just going to kind of carefully move that over to the side, and then we'll come back to that when we put together the second card. On another piece of cardstock that measures 4 by 5¼ I'm going to back both sides. However, I am doing both sides. I'm going to tell you guys right now, I wish I'd only done one. It would have made die cutting easier. So do as I say and not as I do, I guess. On one side, I'm putting stick-it adhesive all over it. I want the entire front to be sticky. To make sure that stick-it adhesive is really good and adhered before we add our cardstock strips, I recommend running this through your die cutting machine. I'm using the Spellbinders Platinum to make sure that it has a nice even application. And then we're going to just partially pull back the backing paper from this. And I have die cut a bunch of strips from a rainbow of cardstock. I did not measure these. These are all really thin though. I wanted them to not be super, super thick because I want each letter when we die cut it to show multiple strips of cardstock. So they're just really thin, probably about 1/8 of an inch, but I did not measure. I just kind of eyeballed it. So they're all going to be kind of varying. And we're going to create a rainbow design background. Now I started with a 4 by 5¼ inch panel because we're going to keep this background for our second card. I'm creating the background to create the letters for the first card that we just did, but I did this with the intention of being able to use both pieces, I guess, if you will. Instead of having a bunch of excess, I knew that I wanted to create my own striped background from cardstock strips, and all of these are scraps of cardstock that I had in my stash. And I knew that I wanted to do that, but not just toss the piece that I die cut the letters from. So we're going to make it a useful piece and do a little bit extra effort by filling the entire background, and then go ahead and create our second card from this. While we have all the supplies out, I don't know about you guys, but I always need birthday cards on hand. So if I can make more than one in a sitting, I love that. And I feel like I'm not having a ton of waste here because I'm using everything that I've die cut pretty much. So we're going to continue to peel back the backing paper. That just kind of protects the part that I haven't adhered a strip to yet from the oils on my hands and things. And I'm just kind of slowly peeling that back and continuing to add those strips. Once we have the entire thing filled, I'm going to go ahead and just grab my paper trimmer, or you can take scissors and just trim that up so that it's nice and even. I like my strips to overhang both sides, and then I'll go in and trim up both of them to measure the 4 by 5 1/4. Now we're going to take the You Take the Cake die again, and we are going to run this through our die cutting machine. Full disclosure, I had to die cut this multiple times, probably 7 or 8 times just to get it to cut through. I did use 80-pound cardstock, white cardstock, instead of a thicker 110-pound weight to make it easier, but just the cardstock strips and things made it kind of hard. Prior to die cutting, I did run this panel, the strip panel, through my die cutting machine without a die to make sure that the strips were smooth and adhere to that stick-it adhesive. It really makes it nice and smooth, almost like a single sheet. When you run your finger over it, you're not going to feel the ridges from attaching those because the die cutting machine just kind of presses everything together really, really nice. So if your letters are sticking at all, if you use 2 sets of stick-it adhesive, again, please, I think 1 on the front is enough, and then you can just use regular adhesive on the back. It does make it nice. I could adhere my entire background panel to my card base because I just peeled off the backing paper. But if I just used 1 sheet of stick-it on the front, I think it would have die cut so much better. But take a craft knife and just kind of carefully cut those letters. We don't want to damage the striped front. And then I started with my white background, which I adhered to a white top fold card base, so that number jumble background. And I am replacing the striped letters in the number jumble background. Just taking my time, going slow. Again, I don't want to mess up my striped background at all. And we're going to simply inlay each of these in the background. A lot of the process for these cards required running my panels through my die cutting machine. So once I have all of these letters replaced, all the striped letters in the number jumble background, the white on white background, I'm going to take this panel and run it through my die cutting machine, and it is going to press those letters into the inlay and make it nice and smooth. And I don't have to worry about those going anywhere. I just waited a little bit for my glue to dry. I'm using some Ranger Multi-Matte Medium. You can use any liquid adhesive here to make sure my letters are where I want them to go and that they're not going to move or go anywhere. And then I ran this through the die cutting machine. We're going to do the same thing with the second background, and that's going to ensure that these letters are going to be pressed and inlaid into our background, and it's all going to be so nice and smooth. But I love how the stripes look in that white on white background. And then we're going to have the white on white letters in the stripe background, which is just as fun. I really love that there's not waste here, that we're using all of the pieces. So now I have removed the backing paper from my stripes, and I'm going to press that into another white card base. And this background goes together even faster. I've got all my letters here, and we are just going to fill those in. I kept the little inside pieces from the O and the A's, just like I did before. And we're going to fill this in and then run these through our die cutting machine before we add our embellishment and another little stamped phrase to finish off these cards. So the star of the show here is definitely these awesome backgrounds. You can do this with all kinds of different word dies, and it just creates really, really fun cards. So there are our two backgrounds. Off camera, I took the new mini cupcake maker dies from My Favorite Things, and I die cut these from lots of the cardstock scraps that I used for the strips. I have all of that cardstock still out. If you want to know exactly what colors I used, they are all listed and linked below the video here on YouTube, as well as on my blog in the supplies. And I'm going to build those cupcakes to sit on top of the letter U in the word U. And we've got our little cupcake wrapper, the little cupcake itself. I opted to use the cherry, but there's also a birthday candle if you want to do that instead. There's a little flag. So there's lots of little options in this little mini cupcake maker die set. You guys know how much I love die cutting. These are so much fun to make. Lots of teeny tiny pieces. There's the little sprinkles, and there's also the little, can't even think. Anyway, we're using the little sprinkles for our cupcake after we build the cherry. So the cherry's on top. I'm going to add tiny, tiny dabs of glue. I am using the Ranger Multi-Matte Medium here because I have a fine tip applicator from Scrap Perfect on the end of this, which is only going to add a teeny tiny dab of glue. And I've got all my little dots over there to the side, and I'm picking them up with a crystal katana and then popping them on the cupcake. And I want them to be really rainbow and colorful. You're going to get tons of these. In fact, I die cut way more than I needed because it die cuts so many with each pass of the machine, but I wanted there to be a rainbow of sprinkles and not just one color. We're going to do both cupcakes, and then we're going to finish with a layer of glossy accents, not only on the cherries on the cards, but on the sprinkles as well. And then you want to let that set and completely dry. And that's going to add a nice little decorative element. In fact, I didn't do this on camera, but once the cherries were completely dry, the glossy accents on the cherries, I did take a white pen, a white gel pen, and add a little highlight detail right on top of the glossy accents. We're going to do the same thing for our second card. And that cupcake just really ties everything together. And it's going to especially work when we add our additional sentiment strip here in just a minute, which is the last step for our card today. And that's going to have like a little sweet sentiment to it, which ties into the cupcake. So once we get all of our little sprinkles there, going to add our glossy accents. And there's our two backgrounds. And again, I have a fine tip applicator on my glossy accents as well, making it work really well for teeny tiny little things like these sprinkles. This is hard to add glossy accents to if you don't have one of these. I love these fine tip applicators. I use them all the time. I've used them probably for several years now, and I highly recommend them. Okay, now it's time to add a little stamped sentiment. I'm also going to add a tiny heart embellishment to each cupcake wrapper. These are just some little red heart embellishments. I love these. I use them all the time. Gives a nice little finished look. That cupcake wrapper doesn't have a whole lot going on, where there's so much going on with the sprinkles and the cherry on the cupcake, so I thought that would add a nice little fun pop of color. We're going to take 2 phrases from the Sweet Sentiments My Favorite Things stamp set. We're going to have a sweet day and have the sweetest birthday. We're going to stamp those on some Hero Hues pitch black cardstock with the embossing and watermark ink. And this time we are heat embossing with white embossing powder. I don't want to use the white satin. I want to use pure white on the black cardstock. We're going to sprinkle that on, heat set this, and then you can cut these into strips if you want to, but My Favorite Things has an awesome strip die set called Skinny Strips that works great with any of their little skinny strips like this, or any other set that you might have on hand. If you guys follow me, you know I love sentiment label strips or any kind of little strips that die cuts a phrase into a strip. They're just perfect. There is a flag end and then the straight end. We're going to just do the straight end here, but I am going to have to adjust it. I didn't want a ton of overhang. So when I line these up, you're going to see that I'm going to line them up with one end of the sentiment, using again a little bit of that repositionable low tack tape. And I'm doing this for both of them. I'm using both sizes. We're going to run those through our die cutting machine, and then we're going to bring that back, pop these out, line it up with the other end of the sentiment, and run it through again. And that's going to shorten the strip, but it's also going to give it that really fantastic finished look. So because with scissors, it's probably such a small thing, but for me, I really like it to have that professional finished edge. So I will just simply line it up, tape it in place, and run it through again, and that gives the other end that perfect die cut edge. It only takes a minute too. It works so easy. We are going to back both of our sentiment strips then with foam adhesive, and then pop them up along the bottom edge of each card right underneath the You Take the Cake sentiment. These thin adhesive strips are my absolute favorite for adding strips to cards. They work great. I keep all of those little extra pieces. You're going to notice that I'm going to use those 2 pieces in the upper left corner for my second strip. So I always save any of those little leftover pieces for other cards. We're just going to piece these together, peel off the backing paper, and then pop this underneath the other phrase. And that's going to finish up our 2 birthday cards using one background. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these 2 birthday cards featuring My Favorite Things Stamps and Dies. The supplies I used to create my cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring birthday card designs that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel to never miss a new card making video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.